Hi everyone, I'm Akifa Katak. I'm a healthcare attorney and I'm also a professional in the healthcare industry. I'm really excited because I get to share some really cool innovations happening. Today we're going to be speaking with Adrienne Mendoza, who is the Chief Operating Officer for BBG Advanced Therapies, and she's going to be talking about different things happening with cell therapies, gene therapies. So we're gonna let her log on and then we can get started. But I'm really excited because me and Adrienne go ways back to Cornell. We're both Cornell alumnus, and so it'll be an exciting conversation. I'm excited to let you guys know what's going on in the healthcare industry. So she got some cool things happening on her side. Let's see. Adrienne, we're gonna log her in. Sometimes there's technical difficulties, so let's see if we can get her. Perfect. Hey, Adrienne, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Awesome. I'm really excited about this conversation.
Me too. It's going to be great.
Yeah, so could you tell me a little bit about your background and, why we're here today talking about healthcare and, what you got going on, what's planning, in your company? I'm excited.
Yeah, well, welcome everyone, and I'm so glad to be here today with Akifa. She and I went to Cornell together. I think she mentioned that in the introduction, but we both studied healthcare, and we'll talk a little bit about how impactful that's been in my career journey as well. But I'm the Chief Operating Officer for South Texas Blood and Tissue previously, and now for a new subsidiary which is connected to that called BBG Advanced Therapies. And what we do is we're in South Texas, and which is actually, interestingly enough, a really good location to do the work we do because it's very central to the country. And we help support companies that are working on cell and gene therapies, which are really bringing new ways of treating disease at more of a root cause to many patients throughout the world. And here in South Texas, we have a large patient population who are qualified to receive these therapies but have trouble accessing it because of the infrastructure not really being built yet around some of these newer therapies. So we're helping to achieve the advancement of healthcare and the local accessibility of those advanced treatments in South Texas.
That's amazing. It's unbelievable. I mean, the amount of lives that you're helping with all these different innovations is really inspiring. So, going back a little bit and just breaking it down to the basics for someone that doesn't know what gene therapy or cell therapy is, considering, we're in the healthcare space, we're a little more open to the ideas of different things. However, sometimes, as a patient, you're like, what are all these different things? It's all intimidating. And, is this the right thing? Is it not the right thing? So what is gene therapy? What is cell therapy? And what would you say to those that don't know
Yeah.
about it?
Well, it's a great question. I think most people are familiar with the kind of standard forms of treatment. For example, cancer. You can have surgery to remove the cancer. You can have radiation to burn the cancer, or you can, so to speak, poison the cancer with chemotherapy. And those treatments have long existed, and they're definitely a go-to for many patients. But when those treatments aren't effective, the next generation of therapies, which have been evolving over the past 25 years or so, really go down to helping solve the problem at its cause, which is largely a dysfunctional immune system. If your immune cells can't fight the cancer, then your cancer or other autoimmune conditions can get out of control. And so in order to actually help patients here, in this case, the immune cells, either from a healthy donor or from the patient themselves, can be isolated through what is like a blood donation. So that's why we're involved in this field. And that blood donation gets the specific cells that are intended to fight that disease. And then they go through processing and actually get training, so to speak, to go back into the patient to fight that cancer or to help the immune system work well again, so that their autoimmune condition or other genetic condition can be resolved. And it's really called gene therapy because we use genes to help program the cells to make sure that they go after the right target. And there are a lot of new investigational treatments for things like sickle cell disease as well, which are found in the same kind of science. It's a cell or gene therapy that helps program or reprogram the immune system to work effectively. So that's what immune cell and gene therapies are about. They're kind of like an immune therapy, but a more advanced form than what we've seen on the market in the last 20 years or so.
That's amazing. So that helps break down understanding what it is. So before we get into the nitty gritty of the industry, because I know we're going to talk about that, and I have a few questions lined up. When does a patient know when to, do this therapy versus other therapies? Their provider might suggest it to them, but when they're trying to do their own homework, what would you suggest to them? The pros, cons, and when would it be appropriate?
That's a great question. Well, their healthcare provider can provide a lot of that wisdom as they go through their treatment cycle. Obviously, there's healthcare practice guidelines, and that will suggest at some point that they might need to pursue another form of treatment, a clinical trial, or a commercially available treatment such as a cell and gene therapy, which are appropriate to their disease. However, these are still new enough therapies that many healthcare practitioners are still also learning about them. So we always know that people, and this is in any case, if you have a condition which is untreatable or not responding to certain treatments that are already provided, you need to be empowered to research what's available so that you can help navigate that along with your healthcare provider to find out whether there's another option for you. So it's also, like the old adage of seek a second opinion, find out, ask a lot of questions, research online. There's a resource that's called clinicaltrials.gov for people who are, have a certain condition, or a healthcare provider who wants to find out if there's a new drug being studied. But the information's available online, and people can definitely do their research. And you should, if you're going through something, definitely feel empowered to research, study, find out if there's new treatments available that may be more effective than what you're currently taking. Because at the end of the day, you're in a fight for your life, and that's something that you need to have all the help you can get, including doing your own research.
No, absolutely. I completely agree with you. And so, two more quick questions before we hop into industry things. If you're a patient and you're told about this treatment, there could be some apprehension, for various reasons. One, predominantly being cost, and if it's covered by insurance. And then the other being, okay, well, I'm putting other people's blood in me. Is that safe? Is this tested? How does that? So those two questions,
Yeah.
the cost / insurance coverage, and then the fact that the actual process of using other people's blood, etc., as part of the therapy, what would you do to reassure them?
Oh, sure. Well, so I'll answer the first question first. And the cost. These therapies can be very, very expensive. It's definitely true. There's been a lot of coverage over, these advanced therapies. They're very effective, but sometimes the therapies can range in the $500,000 to $1 million, which is a shocking number. But when you think about it from a healthcare standpoint, well, number one, this is precision medicine. It's personalized medicine for the individual. So you're not really producing things for millions of patients in one case. These are actually cells that are harvested for that specific patient, whether they come from the patient or a donor. So the processing is different. But because these therapies are so effective, what's being considered by the insurance providers, by the healthcare providers, and by the payer community, such as Medicare, Medicaid, is that these therapies ultimately can cost less than traditional medicines, because over time you might receive numerous rounds of chemotherapy, go through multiple surgeries, go through other immunotherapies, and by the time those all add up, it can range in the same price range or cost to the consumer that a cell and gene therapy can. So insurance companies are starting to pay for these therapies even at those elevated prices, and hopefully, and this is part of my goal too, is to help bring down the cost of these therapies, to make them more accessible. And more accessibility usually means that you have more market, and that means you've got more competition, and that can reduce the cost of these therapies in general. But they are very effective, and so when you think about almost curative treatments, someone going through one round of treatment, getting better, and not needing to go through others, the quality of life and their health outcomes definitely become part of the economics in terms of making sure that these therapies are actually economically feasible. The other part of the question around the donor cells going into somebody, perfectly safe, because we actually, just like a blood donation, heavily screen the health history, as well as any conditions or medications that donor has experienced, so that we're making sure that they're absolutely safe, they're a very healthy person, and that they can provide cells that will not carry any infectious disease, will be completely free of any kind of pathogen which could cause the disease that the patient's going through to get worse. So absolutely, safety is a huge priority for us, and we have a very good track record in the industry of making sure that the patient receives cells from a healthy donor. So it's a very safe procedure as well in terms of collecting the actual cells.
Awesome. So if I'm a patient, I should go speak to my provider, talk to my insurance companies, say, hey, what's my plan cover, etc. I'm interested in this, and here's my illness, etc. And then in terms of the actual process, they should be reassured with the blood transfusions. And I will say, on attorney perspective, when it's enforced correctly and everything is done correctly, it is highly regulated, and I can advocate for that. So when it's done correctly. So the next thing I wanted to ask was expanding access in regards to regenerative therapies for underserved communities. Do you have any thoughts in regards to that and what your company is doing for it?
Yes, it's a great question. So right now, and historically, the therapies that we're talking about have been provided in very large academic medical centers, research hospitals, places where clinical trials are conducted for people who have run out of other options, right? And so that's where this field has concentrated a lot of the opportunity for access, is around those same research hospitals and academic medical centers. But that creates a big constraint in terms of how many people can access them. When you think about our population here in South Texas, someone might have to travel 4 to 5 or even more hours to get the opportunity to participate in that kind of treatment. So in order to help the community hospitals and clinics and areas outside of those major medical academic centers and research hospitals, we have been going about exploring how do we make sure that at least the initial part of the collection of the cells can be carried out closer to where the patient lives. So originally we were, a blood bank, still are, and for our community, and you all are probably very familiar with a blood mobile, a mobile bus that goes out into the community to help make sure that there's enough blood available for people who are going through transfusions. Well, this is very similar. We need to make sure there's enough cells available for people who are going through cell therapy treatments, which look a lot like a transfusion in the end. And it's very similar procedure. It takes a little longer because we're isolating just a few cells out of the bloodstream and then sending all the other cells back. But it takes 4 to 5 hours for this kind of procedure. But we're actually implementing something very similar to a blood mobile, and it's coming out in a few months to be available to people in our community here, so that they don't have to travel 4 to 5 hours to have that initial step of collecting their cells done. And then that way they can also have the vision we have is that they can also receive their treatment closer to home, because that process is getting more and more commonplace. It's more like a blood transfusion than it is like a transplant, and they can receive these therapies in more of their community clinics in the future. So by collecting the cells, helping those cells go to the processing site and then come back, it's helping to expand the access so that it's not limited to just about 100 hospitals across, or 175 hospitals across the country. You can imagine there's 5,000 community hospitals and many, many more thousands of clinics that could potentially serve these patients. But right now, there's limits on the infrastructure.
Yeah, no, absolutely. This is amazing, especially for underserved communities, So I think it's fantastic. I know that even with clinical trials, aside from access, I mean, even the data collection there's been quite a gap over the years. I believe it was around 1993 that women were allowed in clinical trials. And also, with that being said, a huge gap within DI as well. So, under minority women being included too. So you can imagine all of that data, things like that. But with that being said, you have these awesome innovations, a way to access them, which is fantastic. Is there anything else that has been brewing in your company in regards to innovation and new projects?
Yeah, so and actually, just to continue on that thought about the people who have not historically been well represented in clinical trials or also in research. In South Texas, this is one of the reasons why we've been really thinking about this, is we have a very large Hispanic and Latino population. And unfortunately, the stats are that only about 5% of those enrolled in oncology, so cancer clinical trials, are Hispanic or Latino. And that is severely underrepresented, just as women being underrepresented for so many years in clinical trials. Diverse communities of color are also highly unrepresented. So by providing these treatment options closer to our community, we believe we're also helping to improve the diversity of clinical trial research, as well as make sure that those patients in the end can benefit from these therapies, when right now, if it's not been accessible to them in a clinical trial, most likely there's accessibility issues even after the clinical trial is over and that therapy is approved for anyone to use. So, and what else is brewing is that as these therapies become more and more accessible, then you have to have infrastructure to manufacture and test those therapies to make sure they can go back to the patients. And that's also a bottleneck. It's a constraint on the industry right now, because all of the cells get collected and then they go to major centralized facilities. They might be in the US or in Europe, but those cells have to travel far and wide to go to where they need to get processed, and then they come back to the community. So you can imagine there's a lot of uh, flights and trains, planes, and automobiles to get these cells from point A to point B, and they're very sensitive. They to getting too warm or being lost. And these are life-saving treatments. So part of what we're looking at is helping manufacturers, the pharmaceutical companies, to decentralize the manufacturing process so that the manufacturing can actually occur closer to where the patients are too, eliminating a lot of the travel required of the cells from where they get collected to where they get processed, and then they're sent back to the clinic. So we have a facility here that manufactures cell therapies and tests them as well. So we can not only collect the cells, but help them be manufactured close to home and avoid all of that traffic that has to go back and forth.
That's a huge undertaking, and it's very admirable that you guys are doing it because it's needed. And for somebody that has done a little bit of transportation law in the past, I understand the heavily, not just regulated portion, but the entire process of getting very sensitive therapies and sensitive products from one side to another, interstate commerce, etc., exporting, importing, and all the different things that go along with it. The temperature, making sure the trucks are able to go from one area to another without any issues. So the fact that you can decentralize it and to make sure that they're more safe and effective treatments is awesome. I think that's really
Yeah.
cool. So moving on to the next question. I mean, you've answered so many already that has informed a lot of the people hopefully listening to this. Um, let's see. What, how do partnerships with hospitals or startups help you deliver care more effectively? So this one's more guided to the providers and hospital systems.
Yes,
They can
they're,
hop on board with this.
absolutely. Well, so I'll talk with first about the biotech company. You know, a lot of the there's biotech organizations that have been taking what's been happening in a research laboratory that shows, a new disease that or a new treatment option for a disease that has not had a lot of options before. Finally, for example, sickle cell disease. There's patients who rely on routine blood transfusions to help them get through sickle cell, I guess, adverse reactions related to sickle cell disease. And there hasn't been a lot of treatment options. You basically go get a blood transfusion if you're having a severe crisis of sickle cell disease, and then you go home, and then unfortunately it happens again, and you have to go back in to do a blood transfusion. So this is something that has been what we call in the industry an orphan drug indication, an orphan indication. An area of medicine which doesn't have a lot of treatment options, which is why it's called an orphan or rare disease drug. Well, so there's biotech companies that have been trying to figure out how to help solve for those patients who have these rare conditions, and they need help to translate from a research laboratory to a manufacturing environment to meet all of the compliance and regulatory standards that apply when we're talking about a regulated drug product, monitored by the FDA and by any other global regulatory standards. So the process of taking what's done in a laboratory into a production facility to adhere to all of those requirements is quite an undertaking. You've got to make sure that you've got written procedures, all the training for all the personnel, you've got well-established scientific backed data to inform your process. So we help those biotech organizations that have found and discovered or adopted a really promising drug candidate to go through the process of getting it ready to produce at scale so that it can go into the clinical trials first in human, and then get into the later stage clinical trials and on their way to becoming more widely available. So that is where we help the biotech companies by providing that service of scaling up their therapy so that it can get into the clinical trials and do it all in a very compliant way. And then the local healthcare providers, they want to help their patients. And right now it's very scary to them to contemplate sending a patient 6-7 hours away to go somewhere else to receive the treatment option that they qualify for. So our local hospitals and local healthcare leaders and oncology groups, they're looking for options to make sure that their patients can be treated closer to home, so it's not as big of a burden. And many patients can't leave their sources of income, can't afford the out-of-pocket costs related to travel. So by supporting the healthcare providers' patients closer to where their patients live, it's keeping those patients where the healthcare provider can help monitor them, help support them, and where the family of the patient can also be their support system, which is of course so important. If you have a family with you by your side, it can, or your friends, it can make a world of difference in your outcomes. So that is definitely one of our goals, is to help both of those groups. In addition to the patients, of course, it's all really ultimately for the patient, but the healthcare providers want to help them too, and so do the biotech companies.
No, that's awesome. And someone that, has been through different medical journeys myself, I can definitely empathize with having a support network and the cost of traveling. It's a bomb anyway to go through a terminal illness, a chronic illness, etc. And so, and it affects the entire family. It affects you financially. That's why I encouraged, patients to seek out their insurance companies and say, is it covered? Like, how can we get this, how can we afford it, etc. And how can we get access closer to home? Because you're exhausted, you are not feeling your best, in terms of even your, there's so much contemplating. You're contemplating, will I get better? And like, you're thinking about end of life potentially, right? And these are from older people to younger people. And so it takes a toll on families, and having that family support is really important. So in regards to different challenges that you've faced, we've talked about some. I would say that patients are very apprehensive to be in clinical trials, and they're like, okay, maybe I'll do it, but once it's safe and effective and it's really well known, what would you say to encourage patients, to do trials, or, just your thoughts in general in that?
Yeah, well, so I think back to my mom. She had ovarian cancer when I was very young, and she had explored every option possible to help have a different outcome. This was back in the late 80s, 1989, 1988, and she went through all the same treatments people would have today, the surgery, the radiation, the chemotherapy. And there were some very new drugs coming out that potentially held the opportunity for another option. And, I would say that when someone is facing all of those things you mentioned, they're really looking at potentially what's next. Is there going to be another option for me? And they may have run to the end of good options available in a common scenario. Now they have to go to another option, and often those options look like a clinical trial, and they enroll in that clinical trial and they get access to a potentially very promising new treatment. They don't always work, but one of the things that the clinical trials do is they help inform advancement of medicine. And I remember when my mom took the chance to enroll in a clinical trial, she knew that there might not be, that it might not be effective, but sometimes even failing a drug that has maybe the opportunity to help some people but not everybody, the learning that comes from that clinical trial to help advance treatments for other people is so important. So had that clinical trial not been informed by my mom's treatment journey and by other patients, you wouldn't see medicine advance. So it is a very, obviously it's a personal journey for everybody, and what risks or opportunities they want to take on is up to them. But in the end, if they have run out of treatment options, it is a chance for something to be, to work. I know a gentleman named Chris White, an incredible guy. He was going through, I think, his 10th treatment for metastatic melanoma, which is a very common condition where your skin cancer basically becomes metastasized and goes throughout your body. He had a very rare version of it. It was a mucosal metastatic melanoma, so it affected his mucous membranes. And he was out of options. He really got to the point where the cancer had taken over his body. All of the existing treatments and options that were out there were not effective anymore. And he was qualified to get into a clinical trial. He did all the things you're mentioning, asking the questions, finding out whether his insurance could cover things. Clinical trials are usually provided without any insurance requirements. They're sponsored by the drug developer. But he was able to get enrolled to a very promising clinical trial by a company called Iovance that is a tumor-infiltrating lymphocyte cell therapy. So they isolate the tumor-infiltrating lymphocytes, which are the immune cells that got there into the tumor. They isolate those out after they take a tumor out. And then they're processed in a laboratory, actually needing healthy donor cells to help empower the patient's own tumor-infiltrating lymphocytes to grow and expand in the number. So what happens is the patient gets back an army of these already ready to go and trained tumor-infiltrating lymphocytes, which are actually their own lymphocytes. They get them back, and he was able to receive that TIL therapy, what we call TIL therapy, and it worked. His cancer was gone. He's still with us 5 years later, and the cancer hasn't returned. So these are very exciting times for medicine. Clinical trials do offer hope for people. They offer a way to access the latest and greatest thing. And even if they don't work, which is, of course, the outcome nobody wants, they help advance medicine. And that is a generous thing to do when you are, exploring what's next for your life or for the next step in, for your soul. So
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, I mean, it's a give and take. Ultimately, it's individual, and if it's the right decision for the person to enroll in them. And, coupled with that, you have to make sure that you have informed decision making. Ultimately, it comes down to informed decision making. So is it right for you? Talk to your provider, talk to your insurance company, see all the side effects, see what the risks are, and then say, okay, well, do I want to be a part of this? And hopefully, you'll get reassurance that it could be right for you, but don't be afraid that just because it's new that, it's definitely not going to work or it's going to harm more than be good for you. So, with that being said, obviously you take everything in account but it does help medicine, and we want people from all kinds to be able to participate, mainly because, you know, we also need a lot of data, and we want to make sure that these therapies work for those people, right? So people that are minorities, and the only way to know that is if we somehow can spearhead that. So I appreciate that as well. Shifting gear, well, one more thing before we shift gears to Cornell. So what would you say to providers that are listening to this? What do you want them to know? How can they access these therapies and help their patients?
Yeah, well, I will say, don't be afraid of the new things that come around the corner. These therapies, these cell and gene therapies, have been in development and in clinical trials for 20 plus years. They're finally becoming more widely available, but healthcare providers need to have the courage to try things for their patients in their community, and to not say no to the opportunity for their patient to access a therapy just purely on the case of logistics and travel being an unfortunately very difficult path. So, you know, training themselves on what these cell and gene therapies can do, educating themselves on the clinical trial opportunities for their patients, and not being afraid of trying new things. Because I do want to see a day when we're not reliant on the things that we were reliant on 40 years ago, practically. You know, we still are, as a healthcare community, we still are using medicines that have been somewhat tried and true, but not as effective as some of the newer options that are coming out. So I do want to I want to encourage healthcare providers to be bold and to look for options for their patients, and to not say no just due to the logistics.
Awesome. Well, thanks for that. So shifting gears to Cornell, we're both Cornell alumnus, and we took the Salone Executive Masters of Health Administration. For those of you that don't know what that is, I would encourage you, if you're in the healthcare space, even if you're a provider and you want to go more into the admin roles, you can shift, and it has a lot. This program gives you a lot of tools to work with to understand the healthcare system as a business. So do you have any comments on your time at Cornell? I know we've talked about it a bunch, but I just want to hear your thoughts and anything you want the viewers to hear.
Yeah, it was a great experience. Not only did I get a chance to meet some amazing people from all kinds of different aspects of our healthcare community, whether they're from the providers or organizations like me that are, you know, basically kind of technical organizations helping. And so I got a chance to meet some amazing people, firstly, and the professors and the whole community at Cornell was so welcoming and educational and informative. It's become a huge network of support. And what I learned was, well, definitely healthcare is different than a regular business, right? The whole economics are different. Reimbursement's different. How revenue cycles are managed is very different. So while I had a business degree, it made sense, because I'm in the healthcare sector, to go back and get a Master of Health Administration, because there are nuances in this business of healthcare which are unique. So that and really population health equity, I learned so much about the disparities that occur in healthcare. And it has really driven me to look for ways that I can, just like Ezra Cornell said, do the greatest good, right? How can I do the greatest good and use my experience now and my opportunity at leading an organization which is on a cutting edge therapy to help people to get access to those things that have not been accessible to them before. So I feel like the whole program was an opportunity to get the network established, so that I could ask the questions to people who are in adjacent fields, who I could lean on for advice and guidance, and a community of educators that's always with you too. I mean, our entire faculty will always be there for us to help answer questions and connect us to others, and to go back to, and if we have a specific question. So that is priceless. Being able to open up your mind to a new set of skills and experiences and knowledge to help inform what you do in your career and make sure you can do the greatest good.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. I mean, that's a great point to end at, and I really appreciate you being here. Is there anything that you want the viewers to know, anything we didn't touch before we wrap it up? Because that was fantastic.
Sure. Well, if you're interested in what we do at BBG Advanced Therapies, you can always go to our website, which is bbgat.org. We're a nonprofit organization, so always remember it's .org instead of .com. But I look forward to the opportunity to connect with any of your audience that wants to learn more about this. And I also just want to say thank you so much, Akifa, for all that you do. I know you're doing some amazing work to help make sure that people have access to medicine and therapies that they haven't had before. And you do so much to help our community be educated and learn about their options. And kudos to you for making that platform available too.
Thank you so much. We all have to pitch in somewhere. I'm just trying to do my part. And I always say that hopefully whatever skills you have, try to utilize them to help the community where you can. So just one part of the huge, huge, huge network. And, I'm so grateful to be working with you and other people alongside, all the other providers and in the healthcare system. Because ultimately, we all want healthy families, and especially for all the Americans worldwide. All the Americans. So before I start rambling, I'm going to wrap this up. So thank you.
Thank you. All right. Have a great day, Akifa. Bye, everybody.
Bye.